Chapter 17. Iraq. War means government contracts. Lots of them. War is big business. 46% of U.S. taxes go to the military-industrial complex. This figure doesn't even begin to account for all of the black budget projects, Homeland Security, or the $60+ billion the government spends on intelligence. This is a quote by J. Michael Thomas Hayes. When I was in my 20s, I heard a comment from somebody that was talking about the Falklands War, that it was a short war between the British Army and the Argentinian Army over ownership of the Falkland Islands, off of the coast of Argentina. They commented that the then Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, only sent the British forces in because there was an election coming up and that it would be an easy war to win. Therefore she would get re-elected. After hearing this, it made me start to think differently about wars. After the latest Iraq War, my views and opinions shifted even further. Having been brought up under the influence of spirituality, I wondered about the real reason for starting a war. What were the reasons that initiated a government of a country to decide to start a war with another country? The Iraq War against the supposed dictator Saddam Hussein sparked my interest afterwards when the lies began to unravel. The lies from the two jokers, Tony Blair and George Bush, particularly the lies about the potential weapons of mass destruction, WMDs. The most obvious state murder of Dr. David Kelly, the British weapons inspector in Iraq who knew that they were lying about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, has been covered up by both political parties, and Kelly remains the only person in modern English legal history to be denied a proper inquest. Khan Ross, a British diplomat and friend of David Kelly, was told by a very aggressive official that if he discussed Kelly during testimony at the whitewashed and covered-up Chilcot inquiry into the Iraq War, then he would be silenced. This is a quote by David Icke. In mid-2002, Bush was intent on invading Iraq, citing the WMDs. His assurances counterclaim those of UN Chief Weapons Inspector Hans Blix, officials of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and Scott Ritter, a former U.S. weapons inspector, that Iraq had no such weapons. In October 2004, The Guardian reported that 1,625 United Nations and United States inspectors had spent 2 years searching 1,700 sites at a cost of more than $1 billion, and that they found 0 weapons of mass destruction. Julian Borger, reporting from Washington, commented that Saddam Hussein destroyed his last weapons of mass destruction more than a decade ago, and his capacity to build new ones had been dwindling for years by the time of the Iraq invasion. Prior to George Bush's re-election bid, he insisted that although Iraq had no WMDs at the time of the war, it was a gathering threat which had to be confronted. The CIA's Iraq Survey Group, ISG, found that Saddam represented a diminishing threat. Charles Dulfer, a former UN weapons inspector, head of the ISG and its chief author, said that I still do not expect that militarily significant WMD stocks are hidden in Iraq. Tony Blair, the British Prime Minister, George Bush's puppet, said that the report showed that Saddam was seeking to develop weapons of mass destruction and had retained key scientists to do so. Then he backtracked and commented that the situation is far more complicated than many thought. Just as I have had to accept that the evidence now shows that there were not stockpiles of actual weapons to deploy, Mr. Dulfer said Saddam was further away in 2003 than he was in 1991, so the nuclear program was decaying steadily. Interestingly, once the capital was in American hands after the Iraq invasion, the only building in Baghdad to receive the full American protection was the Ministry of Oil. More than 4,000 U.S. soldiers have been killed in Iraq and tens of thousands more have been injured and maimed. The war cost U.S. taxpayers more than $800 billion. Therefore I had to conclude that the reasoning to invade Iraq according to both Bush and his puppet Tony Blair was in fact a massive lie, and to be honest I wasn't really that shocked, but it stopped me from ever voting for a politician and their political party ever again. So how often do the people that are supposedly running our countries lie to us? Of course, I know now that they themselves are just fronts for their respective political parties and are both puppets themselves for the elite 1% running the world, but I came across so many lies that linked both politicians and the weapons of mass destruction, and here are some. Intelligence leaves no doubt that Iraq continues to possess and conceal lethal weapons. President George Bush, the 18th of March 2003. Saddam's removal is necessary to eradicate the threat from his weapons of mass destruction. Jack Straw, British Foreign Secretary, the 2nd of April 2003. Before people crow about the absence of weapons of mass destruction, I suggest they wait a bit. British Prime Minister Tony Blair, the 28th of April 2003. It is possible Iraqi leaders decided they would destroy them prior to the conflict. Donald Rumsfeld, U.S. Defense Secretary, the 28th of May 2003, simply stated, "There is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction." Dick Cheney, the 26th of August 2002, right now, Iraq is expanding and improving facilities that were used for the production of biological weapons. George Bush, the 12th of September 2002. If he declares he has none, then we will know that Saddam Hussein is once again misleading the world. Ari Fleischer, the 2nd of December 2002. We know for a fact that there are weapons there. Ari Fleischer, the 9th of January 2003. 25,000 liters of anthrax, 38,000 liters of botulinum toxin, materials to produce as much as 500 tons of sarin, mustard and VX nerve agent, upwards of 30,000 munitions capable of delivering chemical agents, several mobile biological weapons labs, thousands of Iraqi security personnel at work hiding documents and materials from the UN inspectors. George Bush, the 28th of January 2003. We know that Saddam Hussein is determined to keep his weapons of mass destruction, is determined to make more. Colin Powell, the 5th of February 2003. We have sources that tell us that Saddam recently authorized Iraqi field commanders to use chemical weapons, the very weapons the dictator tells us he does not have. George Bush, the 8th of February 2003. Intelligence gathered by this and other governments leaves no doubt that the Iraq regime continues to possess and conceal some of the most lethal weapons ever devised. George Bush, the 17th of March 2003. There is no doubt that the regime of Saddam Hussein possesses weapons of mass destruction, and, as this operation continues, those weapons will be identified, found, along with the people who have produced them and who guard them. General Tommy Franks, the 22nd of March 2003. This is one of the funniest lies blags. We know where they are. They are in the area around Tikrit and Baghdad and east, west, south and north somewhat. Donald Rumsfeld, the 30th of March 2003. Obviously the administration intends to publicize all the weapons of mass destruction U.S. forces find, and there will be plenty. Neocon scholar Robert Kagan, the 9th of April 2003. I'm absolutely sure that there are weapons of mass destruction there and the evidence will be forthcoming. We're just getting it just now. Colin Powell, the 4th of May 2003. This is a classic blag lie. For bureaucratic reasons, we settled on one issue, weapons of mass destruction, as justification for invading Iraq, because it was the one reason everyone could agree on. Paul Wolfowitz, the 28th of May 2003. But for those who say we haven't found the banned manufacturing devices or banned weapons, they are wrong. We found them. George Bush, the 30th of May 2003. Have you picked yourself up off of the floor from laughing yet? I apologize for being sarcastic, but these imbeciles are not only running political parties that are supposed to be managing the affairs of Western countries, but they are also making decisions on whether to go to war or not, holding the fate of people's lives around the world in their hands. These people should be tried internationally for war crimes. Imbeciles running the World Lunatic Asylum. According to Sean Adl Tabatabai, writing for humanitarianfree.com, there is a declassified CIA document revealing that the 2003 Iraq War had no justification. The justification was based on a 93-page document that allegedly contained specific information on former leader Saddam and the WMD programs he was supposedly running. The document reveals that there were no operational ties between Saddam and Al-Qaeda and no WMD programs. The report revealed that the intelligence community and the U.S. Department of Energy did not think Saddam was pursuing any type of WMD program and was instead developing rocket motors. The general public can now read a hastily drafted CIA document, as the PDF link is on the humanitarianfree.com website, that led Congress to pass a joint resolution authorizing the use of military force in Iraq in order to disarm Iraq of its WMDs, overthrowing Saddam and supposedly freeing the Iraqi people. Wars are the best way of uniting slaves. They'll fight to the death to protect their slave master so that they can go back to being slaves. This is a quote by an Illuminati insider. Neil McKay, writing for the Sunday Herald, commented that President George Bush had planned an Iraq regime change even before becoming the U.S. president in January 2001. The blueprint for the creation of a global Pax Americana was drawn up for Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, Jeb Bush and Lewis Libby. The document, entitled Rebuilding America's Defenses, Strategies, Forces and Resources for a New Century, was written in September 2000 by the neoconservative think tank Project for the New American Century (PNAC). This plan showed that Bush's cabinet intended to take military control of the Gulf region whether or not Saddam was in power. The United States has for decades sought to play a more permanent role in Gulf regional security, while the unresolved conflict with Iraq provides the immediate justification. The need for a substantial American force presence in the Gulf transcends the issue of the regime of Saddam Hussein. The PNAC document reports that this American grand strategy must be advanced for as far into the future as possible. It also calls for the U.S. to fight and decisively win multiple simultaneous major theater wars as a core mission. This PNAC blueprint supports earlier documentation in which the U.S. must discourage advanced industrial nation from challenging our leadership or even aspiring to a larger regional or global role. This PNAC report also refers to key allies such as the UK as the most effective and efficient means of exercising American global leadership. It describes peacekeeping missions as demanding American political leadership rather than that of the United Nations. The report reveals worries in the administration that Europe could rival the United States. The report states that Iran may well prove as large a threat to U.S. interests as Iraq has, and it highlights China for regime change, saying that it is time to increase the presence of American forces in Southeast Asia, saying that it may lead to American and allied power providing the spur to the process of democratization in China. The report calls for the creation of U.S. space forces to dominate space and the total control of cyberspace to prevent enemies using the Internet against the United States. The creation of the United States Space Forces will be covered within the Secret Space Program in my next book. The report also states that new methods of attack, electronic, non-lethal, Biological, will be more widely available. Combat will likely take place in new dimensions, in space, cyberspace, and perhaps the world of microbes. Advanced forms of biological warfare that can target specific genotypes may transform biological warfare from the realms of terror to a politically useful tool. The report pinpoints North Korea, Iran, Libya and Syria as dangerous regimes and says that their existence justifies the creation of a worldwide command and control system. An opponent of the Iraq War and British Labour MP named Tom Daley was quoted as saying that this is a blueprint for United States world domination, a new world order of their making. These are the thought processes of fantasist Americans who want to control the world. I am appalled that a British Labour Prime Minister, Tony Blair, should have got into bed with a crew which has this moral standing. Couldn't agree more with Mr. Daley, and it's no surprise that there is currently a war going on in Syria in 2016 and that there are so many American military forces bases that surround the country of Iran. History is created, manipulated and written by those who are predominantly on the victorious side of the nation which has supreme political, and especially military dominance. Any truth which has the slightest potential of weakening their total hold over the masses is not tolerated. Any truth which can impact their power is squelched or cunningly hidden by them, usually in a manufactured media release to the unsuspecting public, often in a jovial manner to render the information a laughing matter and display it as harmless. This is a quote by former NASA astronaut Clark C. McClelland.